Welcome to episode 8 of The Player and the Journalist with Jillian, Reilly, and David Vick. In this installment, we will be discussing how the NCAA transfer portal will impact the women's game going forward. 14, what up?
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing great. How about you on this Tuesday night? I think it is.
Yeah, doing great. I'm excited to be back. We stuck to the 2 week time, so we're not late this time, which is exciting. But I'm good. I'm excited to talk about the transfer portal. I think it's really sort of changed over the last couple of years, so I think we have lots to talk about.
For sure. And two things before we get into the transfer portal. One, Jillian has been hired. She has joined the workforce. Okay. She is now a tax-paying citizen, okay? And number two, last episode we did who is the best number 7. So I told you to be prepared this
Oh,
time
shoot. I
for who
forgot
the
that.
best number 8 is. Okay. Do you
Oh,
have any answers on the best number 8? Now, obviously, you're going to want to say Charlotte North. That is just too easy.
I
So if you
know.
can think of someone else, that would be ideal.
Okay. Number 8. Okay. Again, if I can't say Charlotte, obviously I would shout her out.
Such a homer.
Captain. Yeah. But I guess in addition to her, I'm gonna go with Katie Hogue.
Cassidy Spillis plays at Rutgers. She's a pretty good number 8.
Okay. Who else you
Um,
got? I feel like you've got this one.
hey, I'm the one that asked the questions, not answered the questions. Okay.
Let's see. We can go.
um,
We can go with previous number 8s at BC. I can shout out Christina Walsh because she was a phenomenal number 8 as well. She was the
Scrappy little
that I
player.
played with. Yes. We got 3 Walshes on the team this year. So
For real?
yeah, two. Yeah, she's two. Her 2 younger sisters are on the team this year.
So you have 2 or 3 on the team this year.
Just 2. 3
Okay,
three
just 2.
Walsh girls played, but Annie's number 3 and Erin is number 21. So
Yes,
junior and sophomore this year.
number 21 is the really petite one, right?
Yeah, she's pretty
Okay, yes. Number 3, Annie Walsh, you said? That's Annie
yeah,
Walsh, correct? Yes, I'm
yeah.
a big fan of her. I think she should get
Mhm.
more playing time. Just me personally, I think she's a little bit of a beast. You feel me? So, Coach Walker, put her in. Put me in, coach. So, okay.
Yeah, she's great.
So, the transfer portal.
Okay.
It's very big. Well, it's become very big in other sports, obviously, the more mainstream sports, football and basketball. It
Mhm.
used to be if you transferred as a D1 athlete, you had to sit out a year. And it's not really like that anymore. Case in point, Charlotte North, she stayed inside the ACC, which for a lot of sports other than football, you could transfer. And if it was outside of the conference, you could play immediately.
Mhm.
Kind of like when we had Rachel Hall on, she's like, I didn't think about transferring into a Pac 12 school because I was already there and I didn't want to have to sit out a year.
Mhm.
However, now it seems like you get to play right away. That seems to be the way of the future. And as a result, we've seen so many transfers, like I said, especially in football and basketball, but we are also starting to see them in women's lacrosse. How do you see the transfer portal impacting the game going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a good point. In Charlotte's case and transferring within the ACC, I think, like you said before, it was always sort of people always sort of turned a blind eye to it because they didn't want to sit out a year. But I think, administration they're thinking more about it and, why hold back these people who are committing to playing a sport in college and having them sit out a year. So I think with this change and, they do take it case by case. I think, making a change like this, I think it will progress the sport further because, like we always talk about, the ACC is a powerhouse conference, and there are a lot of star players who, look to transfer for different reasons, or maybe they decide to play their 5th year somewhere else. So I think it's really going to elevate the game in the sense that, a lot of the top players are going to be traded back and forth, and it's going to shake some things up. It's going to, add certain advantages to different teams. And I think it's going to make the game a lot more exciting because it's going to be a lot of sort of trade offs and strengths of teams. I think it's going to keep the competition exciting.
For sure. So I love what you said about making it more exciting. I think it absolutely will. The fan in all of us, it's like when we see someone go from one uniform to the next, it's like, I wonder what they're going to look like in that uniform, It's just like, I want to see them play with this different team. But I do have a question for you, since you said you think teams will get better and the sport will be elevated.
Mhm.
A concern I have, especially with women's lacrosse, since there are a few top teams, is that it will be like the rich getting richer.
Mm.
What are your thoughts on that? And my one example will be, I have no clue how to say her last name, Sam Gersbach. Gersbach, do you know who I'm talking about?
I have no idea.
Okay, so
From
she played at Richmond her first 4 years, and she transferred to North Carolina as a grad student for this season.
Oh
So I feel
yes.
like that's obviously a major loss for Richmond, because if they have someone that can be on North Carolina's team, obviously that's someone you want on your team and to play there. So do you think it will be the rich getting richer, or how do you see that playing out?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think you do raise a good point. In that and with the powerhouse programs such as UNC just getting that much stronger. Um, but I also think if you look at it from the flip side, I think it's more of an incentive to those schools that are losing the top players to just recruit, more stars and more stud athletes right out of high school because I think it's attractive for people coming out of high school to sort of look at a program such as Richmond and see that there is potential for them to sort of come right out of the gates and fill the shoes of those big players also. So I think I see your point about the rich getting richer. I think that's hard to prevent when the transfer portal is becoming a little bit looser in a way. Um, but again, I think there's gonna be more underdog teams that sort of rise to the occasion because of that. Just thinking about some teams who lose their star players, I think it allows others to step up and create more of a name and get their stats up and sort of put the program on the map themselves as opposed to sort of relying on a couple players. So I see it both ways though. So it's interesting to look at certain teams and sort of gauge the balance of, are they struggling now without that person or those few people, or are they rising to the occasion because of it? So it's definitely interesting.
And to support your point of teams being able to elevate themselves because they get a star player, I think it will be very interesting from the perspective of a Maryland or a North Carolina, or Boston College is adding more depth, but specifically Maryland and North Carolina right now, their backup players, they can be like, I can just transfer and play immediately. If they, go to North Carolina, they don't win the starting job and they're like, I don't want to be a backup. And so after the year, they go to somewhere else like Kimber Howard, who transferred to Syracuse. It could be very interesting if those types of players, because obviously if you get recruited by North Carolina, you're a beast. And the backups at North Carolina can start at a lot of other schools. Same with Boston College, Maryland, Northwestern to a lesser degree. So it will be interesting to see if some of those players start to transfer to, like, even if just a hypothetical, if James Madison's goalie wasn't returning this year and Kimber Howard's like, there's an opening, there's a team that I think can make a championship run that I know is going to the NCAA tournament, maybe I'll transfer there. It would be cool to see big time players go to those schools that might not be the upper echelon, but that are there and that compete every single season.
Mhm.
I think that would be like the fan, and obviously we've talked about the underdog role. I think that would be very exciting. So it will be interesting to see how that kind of plays itself out.
Mm.
Um, and just to add on to the conversation, I feel like there will be more and more transfers going forward, especially when you see Charlotte North transfer, she wins a national championship. Rachel Hall, she transferred, she wins a national championship. You've got all these players transferring to North Carolina this season because they want to win a national championship. And North Carolina is going to be in the Final Four for sure. And if they're not, that's a problem. But anyways, um, I just feel like I I think it's good for the sport, but I hope it doesn't get to be the wild, wild west where it's like someone plays for three different teams in 4 years. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So I think there's something about being loyal to a program, but obviously there are a lot of variables that go into that. So
Right. Yeah, definitely. I think one thing you just said too is the goalie situation. And I think that's sort of a completely different aspect of the transfer portal to look at because I think it's really tough for goalies because they're all great, but it really does matter sort of like where you fall in terms of the other goalies on your team, right? In terms of how much experience is above you, how much experience is coming in underneath you. And sort of, I think the goalie battle is always interesting because,
There's only one.
there's only one. And even like it's tough again with the harder conferences for the backup goalies to even get in because usually they don't. So I think, it's interesting to look at the goalie transfers because it's not always, goalies. It's sort of what we are just discussing about sort of looking to other programs that, haven't quite made a name, but always compete at the highest level. I think those goalie stories sort of come to light when you think of situations like that, only because, if they really want to play and they want to start, then sometimes they have to look elsewhere just for that reason. Not necessarily that they would never play at the school they're at, but it might not be until their senior year or their fifth year. So that's another thing to sort of look at too.
And I'm glad you spotlighted the goalies because even a team like Florida, so Florida last year, very good. Well, they're good every year. They're good every year, but they're not great, I would say. And that's no disrespect to them. They have a great goalie, though. Sarah Resnick, phenomenal. Okay. She can ball with the best of them, let me tell you. But if you take her off the Florida team and there's an opening in goal, if Kimber Howard went from North Carolina to Florida, that would be a big deal. She's leaving an ACC team for a team in the American. Like, that's super exciting. I want to see her play. That's something I want to see, because she's going to a school to get an opportunity. So that's just hypothetical because obviously Sarah Resnick, I think she's a sophomore this season. She is a beast. She's a tiny little beast. She's like Meg Taylor. She's tiny, but she's stopping everything. Okay. I love watching her play. She's a great player. And also about the goalie situation, you made a great point about them transferring because there can only be one. And you were a part of this at Boston College. I would say twice. One year more so than the other when Lauren Daly went out. I think she had an illness. And then Abby Nye stepped in and was just playing hot. So she kept playing. But then come Final Four, here comes Lauren Daly in to save the whole season with the double save. Oh my God. Olivia Ferrucci denied at the net. Okay. Anyways, that was insane. Greatest save of all time. And she saved it twice. So it's a double save. Anyways, go watch the slow-mo. It's amazing. So, and then after Rachel Hall transferred in, you had Abby Nye, who led the team the whole year, the season before, and was a starter. And I remember thinking, I was like, how is this going to play out? Because you have Rachel Hall coming in with all sorts of hype. Well, she played at Oregon. She went to Oregon. And then you have Abby Nye. She's played in the ACC. She's a proven winner. And she didn't really touch the field. And so it's crazy to, like, especially with the goalie position, to see how it plays out.
Yeah, definitely. It's always an interesting sort of battle, I guess, in a way with the goalies. And, one could be hot one week and then another could be hot the next week. So, I mean, I know it's hard to tell. I think coaches handle it so differently. But I think if there does come a case where, goalies are starting to maybe see less shots during practice or, not see as much time during the games, I think for some teams it's pretty cemented pretty early, but other teams I think go back and forth. So again, I think it's one of those things where you sort of have to decide whether, you want to be a part of the team, the potential of the team, if you want to ride it out, engage your playing time, or if it's something you want to play all the time, you want to start. I think that's sort of where the transfer portal comes into question for a lot of goalies. But it's always an interesting story, and it's interesting to see, who sort of steps into place for different teams come preseason and who decides to transfer after the fall, because I think that sometimes happens too.
For sure. So my mind is just going crazy since you spotlighted the goalies. This is like an amazing conversation because the goalie position is obviously one of the most, if not the most important position on the field. You can have a person like Charlotte North or Jamie Ortega. They can score all day, but if you ain't got someone in between the pipes that can stop the shots, you're not going to win any games. So, and then another example of a backup goalie being a great goalie, however, sticking out at her school is the backup who came in for Taylor Moreno in the Final Four in 2019. Hennessy, I think Hennessy was her last name.
Yep.
And she played great when she came in. And
Yeah.
she could have, I think that was her last year with the team, even though she was a junior. I think she just stopped playing. But she could have been starting at a bunch of other schools. Abby Nye, no one would have faulted her if she decided to transfer for her last year of lacrosse because it's her last year. I mean, if you want to play, obviously go transfer. No one's going to fault you for that. So it's
Right.
so interesting because there's a lot of talent that fans don't get to see, but we might get to see going forward with the transfer portal and how that comes into effect. So as a fan, that just gets me excited.
Hmm.
And also, it's like recruiting all over again. So I want to ask you about the recruiting process. Have you noticed a change in the time you were recruited to even now? Is it more aggressive? Is it the same? How would you describe that aspect of the women's game?
Yeah, I think from my time, I think the recruiting process has definitely gotten a little bit more aggressive. I know they shifted around some rules in terms of communicating with coaches, and I think maybe pushing it a couple of months earlier. Um, but I think girls are starting to sort of attach to teams at an earlier stage in high school, and recruit at a younger age. I think during my time at BC, I was touring girls who were freshmen and sophomores in high school, and that's just so young. And I know there's been some people who have committed in 8th grade. Like, I think it's getting a lot earlier and a lot more competitive, sort of as the game does progress. Um, so I think, that that's sort of changing the sport also. If you look at, all these stud freshman classes that are coming in, um, and stepping into starting roles, it's really cool. And I think, it's stressful. I put myself back to, my freshman and sophomore year in high school. And it's a stressful time. And it's, you're thinking for yourself and what you're going to want and what you're going to study and where you're going to want to live like 3 years down the line. So, it's definitely a lot of pressure. But I also think it's exciting for those girls who have committed their whole life to getting better at this game and, wanting to earn a scholarship and all that. So I think it definitely has gotten, a little bit more competitive. I think, coaches are trying to grab the best of the best right out of the gates and get them on campus and all that. I don't know the exact rules, and what they are now, but I think girls are definitely starting to commit at a younger age, which, can definitely motivate them to, push themselves that much harder during high school, hence getting them prepared to play in college. So it's really interesting, and it's gonna be really fun to watch over the years too and see how much it progresses further.
For sure. So to clarify one thing, I believe this went into effect a year or two ago. I'm not exactly sure when, but Kirsten Kimmel, head coach of Duke, she really spearheaded the movement because players were committing so young. I believe they can't commit now until their sophomore or junior year of high school. So
Okay.
obviously it's still young, but I mean
Mhm.
junior year I think it's fine. So it's either sophomore or junior year that they can't commit, and so just seeing it on Lacrosse Extras, here comes National Signing Day, and these girls are like just posting after posting. I'm going here. I'm going here. I'm going here, but that doesn't really stop them from, I guess, verbally committing beforehand at a younger age, like you said, before they actually sign the letter of intent. So there
Mm.
might be some discrepancy there. Um, but I also feel like about it getting more aggressive, I feel like the transfer portal can, it might make recruiting a little more cutthroat because if you see Charlotte North in the transfer portal, you know that if you get her when she's coming out of Duke, she can elevate your team. If you're missing one piece, there you go. If you're not missing any pieces, there you go. She's still going to elevate your team. So I feel like, and especially, how do I say it? Let me back up. When you're coming out of high school, players are recruited, but you never really know who's going to turn out to be amazing. Obviously, you have high expectations as a coach and you see them, but until you see them play at the college level and against these high level players, you don't know how they're going to pan out. So once they're in the transfer portal, you know what you're getting out of them after you've seen them play for a year or two or three or four. So I feel like it might get even a little more cutthroat. It'll be interesting to see how that goes in terms of will there be more stealing other recruits like there is in other sports. And also, I just want to tie into this that with women's lacrosse growing in popularity and ADs at these schools expecting more out of the coaches, I think it was 2 years ago before COVID hit, there were a lot of coaches that got fired for underperforming at different schools. And so with the higher expectations, more spotlight is on the sport, more money is on the sport. Coaches might feel a little more pressure. I need this player really badly because I need a job. I need to hit this win total or whatever it may be. So it's going to be very interesting to see how the women's lacrosse community develops. I think obviously because it's a very tight knit community. A lot of coaches know each other. A lot of the assistant coaches play with each other in college and are super nice friends. But at the end of the day, like you gotta look out for you at a certain point, And I hate to say that in a selfish way, but I mean we all have to do it at some point, different points. So I just said a whole lot. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, yeah, I think you bring up a good point about the coaching perspective in terms of transferring, because I think that's another shift that we've seen is just the willingness to transfer. I think at least if I go back to like my freshman and sophomore years in college, there wasn't as much transferring activity. And I think it has gotten a lot busier in terms of people, wanting to transfer to a different team, wanting to play at the highest level, compete on a, national championship caliber team. I think that's everybody's dream. So I think it's really interesting to think of it from a coaching perspective and sort of how do you sort of incentivize your players to want to stick around, want to get better, even though they may not be playing as much. So that's another aspect to, sort of um, dissolve. And I think it also ties to our conversation about recruiting because, coaches sometimes recruit, by specific character and potential and work ethic as opposed to the skill that they already have. So it's a lot to sort of put together and put under a microscope. But I think coaches, like you previously said, have a lot more pressure on them to sort of coach to perform and coach to motivate their entire roster, whether the people are playing or not playing. Um, because again, like the entire team has to be on board in order for a team to reach their goal. So, it's always a battle and everybody goes through it at some point. Sitting on the bench because all those bench players are playing such a um, crucial part in practice in terms of making everybody stronger. So again, it's a lot, but I think, the willingness to transfer, the pressure of that falls back on the coaches and sort of it's on them to, keep everybody motivated and keep
Keep
everybody
everyone happy.
around. Exactly. So, um, again, I think there's always, different perks that they throw out in terms of recruiting process, in terms of keeping people. But at the end of the day, if they see a stud athlete in the transfer portal, how can they not sort of grab them? So I think there's a lot that coaches have to think through, but there's been a lot of sort of back and forth in terms of keeping everybody motivated, but also, not turning down somebody who could potentially make the team stronger. So
You made so many great points. I love listening to that. Something that you said that I thought was very interesting is you have to keep players motivated. And so that made me think, so you have to recruit the players, but then for the players that aren't playing, you kind of have to recruit them while they're there to keep them there.
mhm.
So that way you have players that you can count on to put in the game if there's an injury or the next year when you have a bunch of players graduating. So it's a very interesting dynamic. And then you bring up, well, if there's a really good player in the transfer portal, it's like, do I go after them even though they haven't been in my program? They
Mhm.
haven't been recruited by me since high school. They don't know me. And it's like, do I choose the loyalty to the players on this team that I've been like selling to and like stick around, you're gonna get your chance, or do I go after this player? It's a very interesting dynamic because it's like
Mhm.
you gotta kind of choose, am I sticking with you because I believe in you, or do I just feel like this player is so much, I wouldn't say so much better, but so good that I want her, and we'll just see how it all plays out. It's very interesting. And then just one last thing I'll add about more pressure being put on the coaches. It's it's the double-edged sword of women's lacrosse growing. Because the sport is growing and there are more eyeballs on it and there are higher expectations. It's no longer just kind of a Title IX sport where we just have it because we have to have it. There are expectations. You're no longer just getting by under the radar. Schools want to see you perform. It's just like college football. The reason there's so much pressure on all these coaches is because they bring in so much money for the school, and the football program is the source of money. So you have 2 bad years, 3 bad years, you might be gone. So it's just a crazy dynamic. And it's just, I guess, the negative, I would say, that comes with the sport growing, but it's something that we all just have to deal with.
Hmm. Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that's what makes the game so exciting too, is just how much things can change so quickly. Um, you know, the rosters are growing in size. So again, that leaves room for more people to step up. And as unfortunate as it is, I think injuries are becoming more common, like you were touching on. So I think, it's interesting to take a step back and look at the different stages of, recruiting an athlete, making them certain promises, but then, they get here and different players come in that coaches didn't expect, like different players leave that they don't expect. I always used to hear it from my leaders at BC, is just, when I was feeling a little bit down as underclassmen, they're like, don't lose hope, so much changes. And you don't want to hear that in the moment, but on any given day, somebody could go down, a couple people could go down, and you have to be ready to step up and play. So that's the exciting part about the sport. And, I think it's fun to sort of have that camaraderie on your team, because at the end of the day, you are teammates, but you compete during practice for playing time. Um, so, it's fun to watch the sport grow and watch different people compete and make names for themselves. And, sometimes you see big stars get sidelined and, have other studs step up. I think, Syracuse was a good example of that this year. So I think that's the fun aspect of the sport. And again, injuries, new players, I think the transfer portal too, it's just another new aspect of the game that causes, teams to shift, coaches to change their strategy, so there's a lot going on. And I think, it's a fun topic to discuss because it's always changing.
For sure. So you're just on a roll tonight. I love what you said about the rosters growing in size, because what does that mean? That means there's going to be more players on a team. However, there can only still be a certain amount on the field. So you can add all the players you want, but only a certain amount can play. And that number is not going to change now, not 10 years from now, not 20 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
So that means more people are going to be transferring, which means it will become more prevalent. And another BC example, Kate Dever just decided to transfer to USC. And so, which personally as a fan, I think of her as an ACC talent because she's been with Boston College. So I think that's good for the sport to have an ACC talent leave the ACC, go to a conference like the Pac-12, and we'll get to see what she does if she starts, whatever the case may be. So that'll be very interesting. And then for people who think the transfer portal is being blown out of proportion by Jillian and I've got some stats for you, and I'm going to prove you wrong. Okay. So the top 4 schools in the country last year at the end of the season in the IWLCA poll: Boston College, Syracuse, North Carolina. Every single one of them have been impacted by the transfer portal. Boston College, clear as day. Rachel Hall, Charlotte North. You take those 2 players off the team, they don't win the national championship last year. You take one of them off the team, they probably don't win the national championship last year, because Charlotte North, insane during the regular season, and she had a great postseason. She broke the NCAA tournament record. But Rachel Hall was, my God, we've already talked about it. She was insane. So those 2 players are the only transfers on Boston College's roster. And without those 2 players, they don't win the national championship. Then you go to Syracuse at number 2. Their website was a little harder to read because they didn't have on the generic roster if there was a transfer, blah, blah. Anyways, Kimber Howard, she transferred there this year from North Carolina. She might start. She might not. But that's a big move. If she does end up starting for them and replaces Asa Goldstock, you want to have had your starting goalkeeper if she hadn't transferred. Very big. Then you have number 3, North Carolina. Olivia Dirks, first team All-American from Penn State, transfers there. Andy Aldave, great career at Notre Dame, transfers there. And then Sam Gersbach. I'm sorry if I'm butchering your name. I'm going to have to figure that out. It's a tough name. So you have those 3 players that go to North Carolina. I mean, that's a lot. And then you have Northwestern at number 4, an underrated transfer last year, and Sammy Mueller, who had a great career at Virginia. She goes to Northwestern, and I don't think it's a coincidence that they went to their first Final Four in a few years with her on attack with Izzy Skane and Lauren Gilbert. Okay. She was a 3-time All-American in her final 3 years at UVA. She goes to Northwestern. They go to the Final Four. She plays a big role in that. all of these teams, all of the top teams are benefiting from the transfer portal. And what we are going to see, I didn't even mention Stony Brook. They had a big transfer from USC last year who went back home to Long Island. It might have been Huff. I can't remember exactly. But all of the top teams are benefiting from the transfer portal. So if you're a school like Duke, a school like Virginia, a James Madison, you got to start getting some of these players, because if you don't, it will be the rich getting richer. And it's going to come down to, honestly, the two things. If someone's transferring, it's either for playing time or because they want to win. Those are the two main reasons. Obviously, you have some cases where they want to transfer to be closer to home, but for the top players and the top teams, it's because they want to win, because they want to play. And if you're a coach, you got to know that. And so that, I mean, just very interesting stuff. I'm very interested to see how this develops going forward.
Yeah, definitely. And, when you look at the ACC again, you can't help but sort of categorize them as the rich getting richer because, like we've seen in the past couple Final Fours, it's mostly all ACC teams. So that's sort of the cases where you look back and have to look at each individual team and sort of see, okay, are these girls transferring to win or are they transferring to play? And with a team sort of like UNC and the players that you just mentioned, having such a stacked roster with so many different stars, you can't help but think, okay, they've got to be transferring to win just because their rosters are so huge that, like we just previously said, not everybody can play. The rosters are huge, but again, not everybody's there to play. So again, it's so interesting to see, but I like the point you make about sort of those teams like James Madison, needing to step up and get some of these players before, everybody just, and I get it, trust me, coming from the ACC, obviously one of the best conferences. I love the competition. Everybody wants to be a part of that. But again, like you already said, it's the rich getting richer. So these teams have to sort of find some way to get some of these players, or just, put all their focus into the players that they have to sort of breed some of those sort of top elite players that are getting all of the highlights right now. But definitely interesting. Definitely, a very prevalent part of the game now. And I think it's only gonna become, more of an influence on all these top teams down the line.
For sure. And you just mentioned kind of breeding players. That does work. You can definitely develop players. That's a huge part of coaching. Okay. The only thing with that is it normally takes 2 years, maybe 3 years. Whereas Charlotte North is in the transfer portal. I know what she can do. I can go get her right now, and she's going to have an immediate impact. And that goes back to balancing. Do I stick with my players that I recruited, that I chose, and that chose me, or do I go after someone else? Because there's a lot of loyalty involved when it comes to recruiting, and it's only going to increase as it gets more competitive, and it's just going to be very interesting. So one point I will make that I can't remember if we talked about this earlier, but if a player is transferring because of playing time, if you're a James Madison, if you're a Drexel, a Denver, a USC, you can go to Kimber Howard and say, hey, you're not going to tell your team this, but you can say, hey, we don't have the depth that North Carolina had. You can come here, and there's a much better chance that you are going to play than you had at North Carolina. And it's like, not to disrespect their team, but it's just true. USC is not going to have the talent that UNC has. Oregon is not going to have the talent that James Madison has. Drexel won't have the talent that even maybe a Virginia has. So you can use that as a selling point. And I mean, obviously players want to play. I mean, you play the game to play the game. You don't play the game to sit on the sideline. So it'll be very interesting. And also, going back to your comment about rosters growing, you have a lot of players in high school. They're the best on their high school team. They're a beast in high school. So they commit to these schools thinking, oh, of course I'm going to play. Of course I'm going to get to Boston College and play. But Belle Smith, I mean, not many Belle Smiths are going to come in and start as a freshman and have the impact she had. You're going to have a lot of them, they don't play as a freshman. And they're going to be like, why am I not playing? And they're just not playing because someone else is better or they don't fit into the scheme, whatever the case may be. And so I feel like that could be a big selling point for these smaller schools. Hey, come here, you can play. Come here, you have a much better chance to play. And so I think that's what a lot of schools should do. I mean, obviously you have to be careful about how you say it because you don't want that to get out to your team. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I think as a prospective transfer player, I think I would definitely sort of try and dissect coaches' feedback and sort of, I guess, the words that they use to, I guess, not only try to persuade me to come to the school, but I guess look at the players that they've previously developed. You just made a good point about, that being sort of a skill that coaches need to have, not only just trying to recruit the best of the best, but recruiting someone who has the work ethic, who has the determination, who has the drive, and being able to develop them into a star athlete. So I think, as someone looking to transfer, and I'm looking at these schools that aren't necessarily the strongest, the best, I think you do have to turn to the coaches, and you do have to look back on what they have done for the program and the players that they have developed, on top of getting that playing time. Because I think it's one thing being promised playing time by a coach. Um, but if you're at a school and you're getting playing time, that's great, but are you getting better? Because I think, like, again, to our point we were just making, there's so much that's going on and so much that can change. So you could be promised by the coach that you're going to play or have more of a potential to play, and then you get there and a day later there's someone just as good as you in the portal who they grab too. So it's one of those things where you have to sort of look far down the line, but also look at to see what they have done to assess, okay, is this going to be the program for me? Because I think, it's definitely, again, I'm thinking of the goalies. It's one of those things where you sort of have to decide, okay, will I have the chance to play and will I have the chance to get better? And I think that's, two major questions that you have to ask if you're looking to transfer. But again, there's always so much that changes and goes on, but it's definitely interesting to sort of put it in the perspective of somebody wanting to transfer.
For sure. So my final thought will be something that we touched on earlier. With the roster sizes growing, more scholarship money coming into the sport, like I previously mentioned, you have these players coming out of high school. They think they're amazing, and they are amazing. That's why they're getting recruited by a Boston College or Northwestern, a UNC. But they get there, and there's like 40 play. At some point, there are some teams with way more players than others. But if you go to a team with 40 players, you get there and you're like, wow, these girls can play. Like, obviously, you knew they could play, but you're just so confident in your own abilities. You get there and you're not playing. You don't play for a year. You don't play for a second year. Some will stick it out and they'll stay with the team because that could be their dream school. It might not be as important for them to get playing time. There are so many different dynamics, but increased roster sizes, I think there will be an increase in transfers going forward. And especially now that's becoming a common thing, they'll be like, oh, I saw this person do it, so I'll do it. It wasn't like when Charlotte North transferred. I mean, obviously it would have been big news because she was Charlotte North, but that wasn't really a thing a few years ago. It wasn't a thing when Rachel Hall did it, So it's becoming more of a thing. And as players continue to do it, these younger players will get more comfortable. Be like, oh, I can do it too. It's no
Mhm,
pressure to stay at the school my whole life if I'm not happy with it. So that's
mhm.
a wrap for me. Any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good way to end. I think, there's always so much going on. I think, the transfer portal's only gonna get busier down the line. But again, I think it's all about the type of player you are, what you sort of prioritize in your career. Like we talked about, do you want to win? Do you want to play? Can you have both? Great. Can you not? That's something for you to decide. But I think wherever you are, it's important to sort of just always remain true to yourself and sort of, you know, if you're not playing, don't give up right away. Don't look to transfer right away. Work at it, talk to your coaches, put in the extra work. Cause again, you never know when someone's going to go down and it's going to be your time to shine. So definitely interesting topic to discuss the transfer portal. But I'm excited to see sort of how much more of an element it becomes down the line.
For sure. So I'm very glad that we were able to talk about this.
Mhm.
Very interesting conversation. There's so many different variables. It's great.